Well, when I'm looking into playing a character, I focus principally on sex.
Did you just ask me about sex?
Relationships are just a no-no. You're telling me you want me to have a relationship with him? Sorry, what was the question? And how much sex I can have as the character. I don't see the point if there's no value from a mechanical perspective. I don't know why you would want to do it if that is the case. Yes.
Don't even want to talk about it. It's disgusting. Oh no, definitely not. Don't know.
I mean, for heaven's sakes, we're all the same. We're all sitting around the table with friends. We're not going to talk about that sort of thing.
My character and his character, that would just be odd.
Alternatively, if you want me to actually have a relationship with you, yes, I accept, but definitely dinner and movie first. Yeah. Oh, sex. No, relationships. Well, what's the difference? Hello and welcome to this episode of How to Be a Great Player. My name is Guy and today we're talking about inter-character relationships and how that doesn't mean sex. It's all important for us to divide the idea of a relationship, of romance, from that negative connotation of sex. And I have done videos on this in the past where people seem to get fixated on the idea that it's about discussing and describing in detail sexual intercourse and the like. Relationships exist between us whether we like them or not, and the relationships that you have with your fellow players around the table are going to influence how your character operates within the game. But your characters themselves need to have a relationship between them, and there's a very solid and singular reason for it. In almost all literature and almost all films and TV series and books and plays and radio plays and podcasts and the like, relationships are the fundamental basis around which all of the characters' interactions and objectives are based. Whether that is the relationship between a brother and a sister, between a lover and a hater, between a stalker and an innocent, between the possessed and the unpossessed, between comrade in arms, it doesn't matter. Relationships are integral to how characters operate amongst themselves. So how do we bring that into our game without bringing in the negativity that comes with it when we start to talk about relationships? Well, relationships are a very interesting thing in their own right, and this is certainly not the channel to discuss how we as human beings mostly form relationships with one another, and this is certainly not relationship advice. What I am referring to, of course, however, is between the characters. These are something that you can construct as an author, as a creator, as a individual who is role-playing. You have the capacity to determine how these relationships play out. Where you don't have the capacity is to see how the reciprocal nature of the other character starts to play out. That's where your fellow player is interacting with your character through their character, and that relationship that grows is something unique and something that cannot be pre-generated. It is something that evolves over time, as with normal relationships. So that means it is a possibility, it is a potential for us to have a lot of role-playing fun with. Now, in the book that I wrote on how to create, the complete guide to creating epic campaigns, I should say, I brought in a relationship table, and I feel that it's appropriate to share it here. So the relationship table that I generated, it was actually two tables, I'm only going to show you the one for now, talks about the three different types of relationships that you might have between your characters and the rest of the party. If I step back a little bit, these are the different types. So column A, if I reach all the way out there, or the first grouping, I should say, are the relationships that generally don't have a lot of emotional investment. It's the employee-employer, the childhood friends, political allies, co-workers, maybe you're all members of a secret cult. The cult is the unifying factor, but how you feel about each other is generally going to be neutral. It might be neighbors. I never speak to my neighbors, and that's because I don't speak Japanese, but if I did, I probably wouldn't speak to them anyway. Maybe Maybe you trained together in a certain paramilitary exercise. Perhaps there was a relationship there on some level. Is it friendly rivals? You know of each other, but that's about as far as it goes. Perhaps it was cellmates in prison for a very short period of time. Column B talks to more intimate relationships. This is where you've got friends, cousins, guild brothers, brother or sister perhaps, who don't have a very close relationship. Maybe it's brother-in-law, sister-in-law, or maybe it's the brains and the brawn. It's some kind of pairing that brings you together on a more visceral level that kind of builds those bonds a bit stronger. And then column C is where we start to get into that murky territory that everyone associates with negativity. There's a certain sense of, well, now that we're talking about lovers, the next scene is going to be where we describe vast amounts of sex happening. That's certainly not what a relationship builder is about. That's certainly not what I'm advocating you add to your game. Lovers, or people who've made sacred oaths to one another, or who share a deadly secret, or perhaps are husband and wife, for example, those kinds of relationships give you so much more to explore. How does your character feel when their significant other, their sacred oathed partner, their lover is not around? Are they anxious? Are they nervous? Do they invest all their time in trying to find them or save them? This is the fundamental plot of 90% of our creative endeavors, is the lover trying to return home or save their beloved from disaster. It is not about the physical act of love that the two of them hopefully will get involved in later on or during the course of the story. It is about the motivator of the character to act. So when you look at these kind of relationship builders, I specifically broke them into these three categories, into the slightly related, into the related, and then into the full relationship. And it allows you to decide at your personal level, well, I think I'm ready to deal with being in a secret cult with somebody else. How do I feel about it when they're not there? Indifferent. How do I feel about it when they are there? Well, it's nice to have a bigger cult. Once you're ready to start developing your relationship role-playing skills, you can move into the fact that they are brother and sister, perhaps, or that they're friends, or that they have worked together in some way. You can start to explore the potential relationships that exist there, and to understand and unpack how exactly they work, and what kind of stories emerge as a result of that. Now, adding this burden to yourself might seem a little bit cumbersome, so we're going to go through a whole lot of reasons why you would do this, and why and what benefit it's going to add to you. So we're going to look at the intent, the purpose, the how do you actually do it, and then what is the outcome that we can expect from adding in relationships into your playing style, into your playing experience. So here we go. So when we look at the intent, what is the intent? You have to clearly define the intention of the relationship with your fellow players. Don't start trying to build a relationship with fellow player characters if your fellow players are not interested in doing it. Don't try and force it upon them. Don't suddenly turn to your fellow player and say, oh, by the way, my character's your character's brother. They may not want that. They may not be comfortable role-playing relationships. They might have the negative associations that relationships come with in terms of, that's all touchy-feely stuff. I can't do that. They might have that. You don't know. So you need to clearly discuss it with the other players first before you do it. I use that table, and I get everyone around the table to agree as to which columns they're comfortable to play in, what level of intimacy are they interested in terms of exploring with their characters. And by intimacy, I mean investment and involvement and caring about the other character, not in any other sense. There is a reason for it to be included. If we play brothers, then I think we could have a lot of fun if we're brothers that don't necessarily work well together. Maybe we try and prove that we're better than each other, but fundamentally there is a respect between the two of us. look at how that's changed, how you're going to play a fighter or how you're going to play a barbarian. If your brother is a mage and the two of you are trying to compete as to who is better at what, you only need to look at the relationship between Legolas and Gimli as established in the Peter Jackson films of The Lord of the Rings to see how that works out. The two of them started off with a certain amount of animosity. That animosity turned into mutual respect. And by the end of the film, it turned into a proper companionship where there was genuine concern for one another. That's a relationship journey that was wonderful to watch and was humorous, added in moments of brevity in these very serious instances, and allowed us to really understand how these two individuals worked. So I would look for a reason for it to be included. If you want to play antagonistic, all right, we're going to play a husband and wife who hate each other. They absolutely can't stand one another, but they're forced to work together. Right, why are they forced to work together? And how are we going to allow this to express itself without interfering with our party's goals and journeys? That's always the important thing, is whenever you add to your role-playing, whenever you're taking your role-playing to the next level, whether that's through relationships or through perhaps injuries or specific things, you need to always have in the back of your mind, how is this not going to stop my party from doing what they would normally be doing when they are out adventuring? How would it in actual fact enhance that experience? And that is the bottom line. How is this going to enhance my role-playing? So let's have a look at that. Well, it has an effect on the PC. It obviously builds relationships, it's fun, and it builds bonds. Now, what does all of that mean? It's a very glib kind of answer. Well, the effects on the PC. Now, suddenly, your PC's decision-making, I think, becomes a lot easier in one sense and a lot more challenging to you as a player in another. In one sense, it's easier because if you are playing a husband and wife who are desperately in love with one another, when your wife or husband is in peril, your PC's decision-making line of focus should be to rescue that significant other. However, what that then poses to you as the player is a very interesting metagame internal dialogue where you need to go, I want to save my significant other. I want my character to rush forward into the middle of that battle, which is a hopeless battle because the emotional drag, the emotional tug is there. They want to go in there. That is what emotionally the relationship has on my character. Metagaming wise though, it is a situation that I can see I would be better suited, and the rest of the players seem to be going in that direction, better suited to actually falling back and later going to go and rescue the significant other. You have to then figure out in your head how to portray this longing, this desire to want to go and save the husband or the wife or the whatever, but a willingness to accept the party's general line of thought. And what better way to express that than that wonderful moment where your character starts to run forward, no, I will not abandon you! And the rest of the party, someone in the group says, I hold them back and say, no, we must come back another day. If you are riding on the character's motivation, they will struggle and push against being held back and will try to go towards the intended saving sort of situation. As a metagaming player who knows that the relationship is there to enhance, not there to hinder gameplay, you will reluctantly be pulled back and go, well, no, but, pull me faster, pull me further, the orcs are coming. No, I can't leave you. Come on, really pull me. You need to pull me now. You need to embrace that. That's the interesting line. That's the interesting balance, I find anyway, where you start to have these relationships and you start to look and see how do they work, but narratively, how can I make the game more interesting? What that then character then does is, and this is where the fun comes in, that character then starts obsessing. How are we going to save this person? They arrive at the tavern, they're frantic, they pace up and down, they sharpen all of their blades, they're eager to go. It gives you all of these wonderful things that you can express, that you can talk about. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the video, where you can talk about all of these kinds of things. as a player describing what your character is doing. Whereas if you didn't have that, if you didn't have that relationship, well, all right, the person's been dragged away, there's too many of them, let's run away. So there isn't necessarily that same driving force. And then once, of course, you are going to go and rescue this individual, there is that drive to do it. There's that impetuousness that needs to be held back a little bit by the fellow characters. But then once the rescue has been effected, there is joyous jubilation. And perhaps even there is a certain amount of apologizing that your character needs to do to the other characters. I'm sorry that I really I lost my head, I wasn't thinking. All of that, it takes nothing away from you as the player. And as a matter of fact, it adds, because now you have a character who's remorseful for their actions. They realize what they did. They're apologizing for it. They're building bonds with the other characters. You as a player are expressing good human behavior, supposedly. You are building with your other players a much more interesting story. A barbarian who is remorseful about losing their head is a much more interesting barbarian than one that just flies into a rage, does stupid stuff, and then moves on in the next adventure. It's about creating real characters, about making these things really, really work. And I really, really, really rebel against this cold that's holding my voice back. I hate it. Now, when we look at how do we play out relationships, this is where oftentimes people get uncomfortable, and rightly so. If you are a bunch of people sitting around the table, doesn't matter what gender you are, doesn't matter what your orientation is, if you are trying to now enact affection, placing your hand on someone's shoulder, placing your hand on someone's shoulder, heaven forbid, running your finger across their cheek in a husband, wife mixture, whatever you want to do, that's crossing the line, and you shouldn't ever do that. You should never use actions, use words. My character looks longingly at your character, or if you are in the first person, I look longingly into your eyes and I stroke my hand, my fingers lightly over your cheek as I repeat the phrase, "Forever to a tree, forever to a day, I love thee." That wasn't awkward, that was a tender, beautiful moment. If, on the other hand, I was actually stroking your cheek while saying it, that crosses boundaries that one shouldn't necessarily cross. It's not LARPing, it is role-playing. And even in LARPing, that would be a serious, can we do this first before we go anywhere further type of question that you should be asking. So, words, never actions, and then actions of affections. Contradictory? No. Describe things. So you describe the actions of affection. And if you don't know what the actions of affections are, so I give your character a hug. It's been a long day. I cuddle up next to your character. I sleep on your character's feet. Whatever. Describe the actions that your character is doing in words, not in actions. Give us that sense of romance, that sense of intimacy, that sense of relationship in words of action. And it's a few words. You don't have to write a book. Don't tell me for 25 minutes whilst you are giving a back massage and you're working from the upper back down to the lower lumbar. And you don't need to do all of that kind of stuff. It is the idea that I give Therigan a back massage as the campfire crackles quietly, and whilst giving Therigan the massage, I'm talking about the day's actions, and then you talk about the day. However you want to do it. It's quite difficult to describe in a first-person, third-person, first-person narrative as I am trying to do for your benefit, but I think you get the idea. The idea, of course, being just tell us what your character is doing, don't physically do it. And if you don't like making eye contact with your fellow players, I completely understand that as well. There's nothing wrong with saying Marilise gives Therigan a back massage whilst they discuss the day's events. Simple, easy, effective, It builds the relationship. It tells us what's going on. It lets us into the minds of the characters, which helps build them. Now, the outcome, of course, is that we get close relationships. We start to see that these two characters are definitely fond for one another. We start to invest in the story more. And there's a reason for it. These creatures, these characters that we have created, start to feel more real when we start to think of them in terms of their relationships rather than in terms of them as individuals. One can certainly think of almost anyone in terms of their actions, their abilities, their functions, as one might think of, say, a movie character. But when one starts to think of the emotional connection, the relationships that one has, one starts to build an epicness. It wasn't because necessarily Frodo trekked all the way across the Shire and Mirkwood and Rohan and all that sort of thing to get to Mordor. It was because Sam never left his side. There was this devotion that Sam had, and Sam had these conflicting emotions between wanting to work with Frodo and hating Gollum. There was this very interesting interplay that happened between the two of them. The relationships between Luke and Leia Skywalker and Darth Vader, another great example in Star Wars. And in almost any other show that you can come across, it's always about the relationships and how they interplay with one another and the individual characters that are in those relationships that make things just that much more interesting, that much more epic. So it's definitely something to think about when including in your game. So that's why when we talk about romance, not sex, we talk about relationships, not sex, we talk about basically building bonds between characters, not sex. It's something for you to think about. And I have seen on this channel repeatedly people who push back. No. It's just about going through various survival scenarios, rolling dice, killing monsters. Yes, on the surface, that's what it is. But if you want to take your game to the next level, you're going to start to look at how do you build relationships? How do you build characters together to make these things that much more interesting and that much more epic? Now, if you want to have a look at some of these in action, I have launched a new live role-playing sessions where I'm running a game with 3 amazing players. They are building relationships. They go through these kinds of motions. Join me at 6 p.m. on Pacific Standard Time, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Mondays, where the show launches. It's called The Broken World Chronicles. You can find that on twitch.tv/GreatGM. Find us there on Mondays, and half an hour before the show I talk about what I'm planning on doing in the show. We would then run the show for 2 hours, and then at the end of the show I talk about how my plan was derailed by my players and the relationships that their characters have formed and how we move forward from that. So it's a very fun interactive experience. You can come along, you can chat to the cast as in between the shows and sort of before the show and the like. It's a lot of fun, and you get to see a lot of this in action, so you can have a look and judge for yourself whether it is something that you want to incorporate in your role playing or not. Until next time, however, I wish you and yours the very happiest and romantically relationship building experience that you can possibly have gaming, playing, role playing thing. So with the like button, I have a secret cult. With the subscribe button, I have a stepsister, stepbrother relationship. And with the Goblin Bell, ooh, we share a deadly secret. I wonder what it could be. Smack that Goblin Bell and find out next week. Sex is the most important thing in the world and should always be involved in everything that anyone ever does.
No, there is no room for it whatsoever.
No, it would just be weird. It would be weird. It really would be weird. It would be strange. No, I don't see that. No, I just think that we should be killing monsters and cutting things' heads off and that sort of thing. I think
At all. No sex. Ever.
I mean, why would I want to do that in the first place? It's bizarre. Well, I've never had a real relationship myself. I'm not sure. No. I think that sex is actually what role-playing is all about. No, I'm not convinced that there is any space for sex in games. Where's the goal? Why is it going to make it better? I don't understand why it's going to make it any better at all. Definitely no to that. My question would be: do I get an advantage? Is there a mechanical advantage that I get? Do I get like a +2 or +3 when fighting monsters? If I have a relationship with this, my character has a relationship with that character. Is there a benefit